Welcome to the Friday edition of Juan's World, and I'm going to be continuing my series on Unpacking Christmas. Now, if you did not see my last video, I will remind you that my idea of unpacking Christmas is about taking all of the things that get tossed together, reindeer, Santa, angels, snow, snowmen, all of the different images and songs, White Christmas, O come all ye faithful, O come, Emmanuel, everything just all tossed together so that when you go into just about any store in the United States or in the United Kingdom, after beginning of November, really, used to be after Thanksgiving in the United States, used to be after Guy Fawkes in the United Kingdom, but now it's like any time in November onwards. You've got carols blaring, you've got images all over the store, Merry Christmas, candy canes, everything just all tumbled together. And my idea of unpacking Christmas is to say, let's take those different images and put them in the right place. You know, the Magi, the three wise men or the three kings, whatever you want to call them, appear on Epiphany, January 6th. They don't appear on November 12th or even on Christmas Day. If you make a nativity scene, one of the things that you can do instead of having everybody all in the nativity at one time, Mary, Joseph, the shepherds, the baby, the angel, the wise men, like the oxen, everything just all tumbled together. One of the things you can do with the nativity is to start off around this time of year with the scene. Usually it's a stable, although that's not what the Bible says, but we'll just keep with the stable for the moment. You can have the stable right now, and you can have some cows in it, and that's it. Because that's what historically Luke says. And then slowly you'll add things. You can add Mary and Joseph on Christmas Eve maybe, or the day before Christmas Eve. Add the baby Jesus at midnight on Christmas Eve. Then add the shepherds. Then take them away, because Luke says they went away. And meanwhile, I mean, you can have the wise men. I used to do this. I used to have the wise men somewhere all the way across the living room, and every day I would bring them a little bit closer, a little bit closer, a little bit closer, so that on Epiphany they had arrived. Now that's part of what I call unpacking Christmas. But I wanted to today talk about some of the high church holidays within Advent, most especially within the first and a little bit into the second week of Advent, because we're in the second week of Advent now. So let's get into specifics. Now you can follow some of my days of Advent in my blog, Book of Days Tales, and I'll give you a link below. The thing is that there are numerous feast days in Advent and in the Christmas season in general, leading all the way up to Epiphany. And I think it's a bit much to celebrate all of them. And some of them are highly specific to particular cultures. So if you adopt one of them from a culture that you're not familiar with, it's maybe okay, but also slightly weird. If you adopt like Santa Lucia, for example, well, that's okay. I mean, that's a festival of light, and we'll get to her eventually. But that's really a Swedish tradition, and one that most Brits or Americans wouldn't recognize unless they have some Swedish heritage. Let me start with the one that is perhaps the most common, or was the most common historically, and that's St. Nicholas Day. St. Nicholas Day is December 6th. Now, St. Nicholas was Bishop of Myra. Myra was in Asia Minor in the 3rd and 4th centuries, which is when St. Nicholas was around, and he wore a red robe trimmed with white fur. So, what does that remind you of? If you see his icons, which are all throughout Greece and Russia, he's always in some kind of red robe trimmed with white, or almost always. Well, pretty obviously, and if you also take the name in Dutch, Santa Claus, then he's Santa Claus. So when people say, oh, Santa Claus doesn't exist, what they mean is that the Santa Claus of Western Christian legend, riding a sleigh and distributing presents on Christmas Eve and so forth, well, maybe he doesn't exist. But Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, certainly did exist. In fact, he died on the 6th of December, 343, and saints are typically feasted on the day they died because that's the day they are translated into heaven, and so it's a victory day, a celebration day. And so the 6th is St. Nicholas Day, and it was a day of giving presents because, among other things, St. Nicholas was famous for his generosity. And there's one particular legend which you'll really understand when I spell it out. Although it comes in various forms and has various people debating whether it actually happened or not. I'm not going to get into that. Anyway, there was supposedly in Myra a poor man who had several daughters but didn't have enough money for a dowry for them to be married. And so they were theoretically condemned to remaining single all of their lives. But as they grew up and got ready for marriageable age, it's said that St. Nicholas used to visit the house at night and throw money in the window so that there was enough money for a dowry for that girl to be married. And he did this sequentially as the daughters matured to marriageable age. There is another tale that says that he used to climb on the roof and throw the money down the chimney. And then another legend that says that one time he threw the money down the chimney, but there were stockings hanging by the fire to dry, and the money fell into the stockings. All right, you get the idea? I mean, all of it is nonsense, of course. It never happened. But you can see how the legend of Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, developed. And his day is December 6th, so it's the one that is very important in a lot of traditions, but mostly in Germanic traditions. And on St. Nicholas Day, in both Germany and in the Netherlands, some villages and towns have parades featuring St. Nicholas, and sometimes also Black Peter, who's a bit of a shadowy figure but may represent the dark side, with St. Nicholas representing the light side and Black Peter celebrating or symbolizing the dark opposite of St. Nicholas. That one's a bit murky. On St. Nicholas Day, in many countries, historically, in the 19th century, into the 20th century, St. Nicholas Day was the day for giving presents, not Christmas Day. The thing about Christmas Day was that it was a day for family and friends to gather and have a big meal. That's what Christmas was mostly about. But we also need to remember that in the English-speaking world in particular, Christmas was not a big festival until Dickens' time. It had its ups and downs. There were times when it was important, but there were also times when it wasn't. And the whole point about Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens is that he was trying to reinvigorate something that had fallen a little bit into disuse. The whole thing about Scrooge expecting Cratchit to work on Christmas was a reference to the fact that a lot of people did work on Christmas Day. And there's also a lot of sects or denominations within Christianity that don't actually celebrate Christmas Day, because Christmas Day was an invention of the church sometime in the early church, in the 3rd or 4th century, because it wasn't celebrated and there was no date for it. There's no date mentioned in the Bible, and so it was fixed on. We'll get to that in other videos. In the 19th century, Dickens was worried that Christmas was not being celebrated properly, was not given enough accord. But you'll notice that in A Christmas Carol, if you've actually read it, and I do recommend reading it, that presents are not a huge part of Christmas. What is a huge part, what is focused on very, very specifically, is the meal. And the meal at Bob Cratchit's house is, like, for me, like a center point. And it talks about him and his family having a goose and Christmas pudding, all the things that I love about Christmas Day. We'll get to all of that part later because there's a lot of misunderstanding about that also. But anyway, that's St. Nicholas Day. The day before St. Nicholas Eve is called Krampusnacht in Germanic countries, and celebrates or symbolizes Krampus, who is this sort of almost devil-like figure, who is the opposite of St. Nicholas. He takes all the naughty children, the ones who've been bad all year, and dumps them in a sack and takes them away. It's not something I'm really all that fond of, but that's Krampusnacht. So now let's talk about December 8th, the Immaculate Conception. This one's a problem for me. It's a feast based on Catholic dogma, which goes something like this. Jesus was supposedly born of a virgin, the Virgin Mary, so that he was born without original sin. And because he was born without original sin, he was pure, blameless, spotless, if you like, so that when he was crucified, he was the perfect victim because he did not have any sin. He was our token sacrifice, the sacrifice for everybody to redeem us all from sin. Okay, that's the theology. But then the Catholic theologian stepped in and said, wait a minute, we need to go back one step further because he cannot be born without sin unless his mother was born without sin. So we have to go back one generation that Mary has to have been immaculately conceived so that she was born without sin and therefore she could have the virgin birth of Jesus. So December 8th is the feast of the Immaculate Conception. Not the kind of thing that I'm terribly interested in because this is all stuff that is made up by the church to fulfill its logic. And I'm not real keen on logic and theology. But anyway, the Immaculate Conception, December 8th, is in many Catholic countries the starting point of the Christmas season. It is in Argentina, where I was born and where I lived for many years. It is in Italy, although it varies. But when I lived in Buenos Aires, it was very notable that there are virtually no decorations in the city of Buenos Aires at all until the Immaculate Conception. And then after that, various bits and pieces start appearing. And the same was true when I lived in Mantua in Lombardy, in northern Italy. Construction crews would be out and about in the city putting up lights because that was the main form of civic decoration. But then they were lit on Immaculate Conception and they remained lit throughout the Christmas season. Before that, there was nothing. And so our two festivals for the moment that are part of my unpacking of Christmas are St. Nicholas and the Immaculate Conception. But let me add a couple more that you may or may not want to celebrate, but they have their own Christmas festival parts associated with them. The first one is December 4th, that is St. Barbara or Santa Barbara, a very important Christmas saint in Greece, and she's associated with a particular kind of pudding, St. Barbara pudding, which you may want to make. It's a wheat and milk or cream pudding that's sweetened, so it's kind of like sweetened oats or something like that. And the 7th is St. Ambrose, and St. Ambrose also associated with special foods called, not surprisingly, ambrosia. Now, as it happens, it's not that ambrosia is named after Ambrose, it's the other way around. Ambrosia used to be the food of the gods in Greek days. They lived on Mount Olympus, they drank nectar and ate ambrosia, special foods of the gods. And Ambrose, the name, comes from the food of the gods, not the other way around. But his feast day is December 7th. So I'm not sure how you might want to incorporate some of these feast days into your unpacking Christmas. What I do, I live alone, so I can do whatever I want, is that I have my Advent wreath, which I talked about last time. Last Sunday was the second Sunday in Advent, so I lit the second candle. So now we're in the week associated with love. The first week was hope, and next week will be peace. And I will light the Gaudete candle, the pink candle. So the wreath is my first decoration, and what I tend to do, take a look at it here, is that I tend to add things to it as the Advent season goes on. Just, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. I've also got a table where I've got a few Christmas things, but I don't have anything else yet. I have the decorations ready. I have lights. I have some tinsel strands and various other things, but I'm not going to put them up yet. It's going to just grow and grow and grow. I probably won't get everything all in place until the fourth Sunday of Advent, which is right before Christmas. Christmas is on a Wednesday this year. So by the Monday or Tuesday of the last week of Advent, I'll have all the decorations up, but it's going to be building slowly. And I'm going to be talking more about the feasts within Advent in future episodes here. And I'm also going to talk about the historical record, or lack of it, for actual Christmas. But I'll talk about that in another episode, because I want to also focus on what I consider to be wrong-headedness. That is, that Christmas is not a co-optation of the solstice or of pagan tree worship or holly or mistletoe or whatever. I want to dispense with a lot of that. Some of it's okay, some of it's not. When people say, well, Jesus was born in the summer, it's quite obvious because of whatever in Luke. What I want to do is dispel a lot of that historical rationalization, but that's all in the future. But now the one thing you can do is tell all of your friends about Juan's World and ask them to like and subscribe, and I hope you continue to have a happy Advent.